Back in November of 2018, at the North American Fan Fest, attendees were treated to the first teaser trailer for Shadowbringers, the new expansion of Final Fantasy XIV. And in it we saw the Warrior of Light stumbling across an unknown land in the same gear he wore in the original Final Fantasy XIV trailer way back in 2010. He was beset with flashbacks and images of our past, our struggles, our triumphs, our pain, all that we have done since taking up the mantle of Warrior of Light. Then we are confronted by an adversary made of light, who again and again brings us to our knees. But all is not lost, as we're able to become what we must, the Warrior of Darkness, and with one swift blow, we vanquish our foe. Now this led to a lot of speculation amongst the community before the launch of the actual expansion. Were we going to leave Hydaelyn and the Scions to work with the Ascians? Were we going to have to embrace the darkness and achieve a state of equilibrium? Or were we going to use the powers of Zodiark against the Ascians to foil their plans? And then the expansion dropped. And before I continue, I want to warn you that this will contain a lot of spoilers for Shadowbringers, so if you haven't played it yet, I would stop right here, because this story is some of the best storytelling we've gotten in Final Fantasy XIV, and in fact, in Final Fantasy period in a long time, so it's best to be experienced fresh. Now, it wasn't long after the expansion released that a friend of mine made an off-the-cuff remark on the official forums about how he didn't really feel like the Warrior of Darkness, not like he was led to believe anyway. And this sparked a thread in and of itself about whether or not the Warrior of Darkness theme was one of false advertising, or whether or not we were actually even a Warrior of Darkness. The community seems somewhat divided on the subject. Some defend Square Enix, of course, saying that we are indeed the Warrior of Darkness. Well, some say we are, but not really, and others say, nope, not at all. Not at all. There are a lot of arguments as to why and why not, but I wanted to break down some of the most common of them, as well as my own personal feelings on whether or not we are actually a Warrior of Darkness, especially pertaining to the way it was presented to us. And if I make any mistakes in anything lore related, please let me know. I mean, there is a lot of information to go through, so sometimes it's easy to miss certain details, and there's been some retconning and some things are just fuzzy, so yeah, let me know if I make any mistakes. So I want to start with the arguments that people have been using as to why we are indeed the Warrior of Darkness. And the most basic one is because that is what people on the first call us. We are the ones prophesized to bring back the night and to hold the light at bay. We are the savior of their realm. And this is true, but only in the most literal of senses. We are the Warriors of Darkness because on the first, that is what they call us, a handful of times anyway. I really felt the whole Warrior of Darkness thing was kind of a footnote at best in the story, and it really didn't make us a true Warrior of Darkness, because say the planet were flooded with Earth Aether and we had to hope, bring it back into balance, we would be known as the Warriors of Water to those people. But we aren't a Warrior of Water, we are still the Warrior of Light, as we are not aspected or the chosen of the water element. It's just a title that some rando uses for us. It changes nothing. And I think this argument loses purely on what we are shown in the trailer, but more on that later. Another argument that people proposed was that we are the Warriors of Darkness because on the first, the meaning of the astral and umbral are flipped, so we are technically the Warriors of Darkness because on the first, the darkness or the umbral is actually the light. But this is also misunderstood, and this can be a little bit confusing, so bear with me here. On the first, as in on the source, astral and umbral are not elements in and of themselves, and each of the 6 actual elements, those being fire, earth, air, water, lightning, and ice, can be aligned toward one more than the other. Think of the astral and the umbral more as positive and negative charges, or the active and the passive as Urianger actually describes them. What we call astral on the source is represented by and accompanies light. What we call umbral on the source is represented by and accompanies darkness. But even if we are mistaken on which one is active or astral and which one is passive or umbral, that does not suddenly mean darkness has become light. Light is still light, even if it slows things down instead of speeding them up. The only change in our understanding is how it acts. And even if we had it backwards, as Urianger also suggests, and Hydaelyn is actually the Elder Primal of the passive force, that changes nothing. We are still Warriors of Light. Hydaelyn herself calls us as such. We are not embracing darkness. There is just a change in nomenclature. This whole arc too seemed kind of off to me. I mean, you would think aetherologists and thaumaturges and conjurers and everybody else who has worked with ether daily over tens of thousands of years would have realized at some point that light, or the astral, was the passive force. So I don't really understand how we could possibly have had this backwards on the source, but that's a topic all of its own. This also brings me to the topic of good and evil, since we often see evil as darkness and light as everything that is good, due to being conditioned through things such as literature, TV, movies, on and on. So some have taken this to mean that if we would become the warriors of darkness, we would be quote unquote evil. And that simply isn't possible. We are heroes, not villains, so we would never ever side with the Ascians. This is Final Fantasy after all. And side note, if you honestly think that, in a Final Fantasy we would never ever work with the villains or those we once saw as villains to achieve a goal, you really must refamiliarize yourself with the franchise, and honestly, even Final Fantasy XIV itself. But this whole light is good, dark is bad cliche is also something of perspective. I mean, as we found out in the story, the Ascians were a people of learning, of creation and experimentation. They wielded strong magics that could bring nearly anything into existence, and they seemed to live in a state of relative peace and harmony. And when the world itself was on the brink of destruction from something unknown, many of the Ascians sacrificed themselves to summon an entity known as Zodiac that brings balance back to the world. But as some feared the power Zodiac had, they summoned a counter to keep him in check in the form of Hydaelyn, who promptly broke the world and everything in it into 13 reflections and the source. Since then, the remaining Ascians, who were not themselves broken apart, dedicated their lives into rejoining all the pieces of their world, all the pieces of their friends and their family. So who's good and who is evil here is really relative. On one hand, you can say Zodiac and the Ascians are evil, because they're trying to destroy the worlds and slaughter millions, if not billions of lives, all in the name of their dark god. But if you look at it from the Ascians' perspective, they're the victims of genocide. Their world was destroyed. Their family, their friends, had their souls sundered and spread over 13 reflections of the source. They see the shards and those who dwell in them as pieces of a whole, and they want to be reunited with the people they lost. In that sense, we are the villain. We are the emissary of evil, the henchman of the being who brought the greatest destruction the world has ever seen, destruction that made every calamity we have suffered pale in comparison. The Ascians see the rejoining as a moment of pain that is required to bring about healing. Someone else chimed in on this and said that since so many had to sacrifice themselves to bring about Zodiac, that in itself makes Zodiac evil. But to me, no, that's not true. Zodiac was born out of self-sacrifice. The people who died were not prisoners. They weren't drug off and forced onto some altar. He was born out of the love these people had for their community, their families, and all who dwell in their world. And this is a common trope of the hero, not the villain. Hydaelyn, on the other hand, was born of a people who feared something more powerful than themselves. They sought to control it and keep it in check, not to devise another way to feed him power, the power he needs to keep the world from literally imploding. So again, good and evil are all a matter of perspective. Being the chosen of light means nothing in that regard. And if you didn't notice, it took very little effort for me to make Hydaelyn sound like the bad guy here. So again, it's all perspective. Everyone is a hero in their own story after all. But since you've just heard me contradict each one of these arguments, I am sure you have by now realized that I am on the team of no, we are not, in fact, the Warriors of Darkness, at least not the way we were meant to believe. And I'm going to tell you why I think this is. So let's start by going back to the trailer. The Warrior of Light, or at least the one who represents us in the trailers, is stumbling through an unknown land, saturated in light, haunted by flashbacks of all that we have done, all that we've experienced after becoming a chosen of Hydaelyn. Then suddenly a beam descends from the heavens in a beam of pure light and attacks us. I mean, now that we know the story, this all makes sense. But remember, back when we first saw this, we didn't. It made no sense. We attack this creature with all that we have, using all the gifts we've obtained while under the servitude of Hydaelyn, represented by the various classes the Warrior of Light has taken up over the years. And each and every one of these is struck down. Now cut to a scene of a mysterious figure in the Crystal Tower, talking about how history needs to be rewritten. what was done must be undone, before cutting back to us fighting this light aspected creature and being told, become what you must, embrace the darkness, which we do, and with it, we cut down our foe and the sky goes dark. We also see a change in our character at this point as he's surrounded in deep purples, coloring that's used to represent the umbral and the dark aspect. All of this, in my opinion, alluded to a shift, to us breaking away from the bondage of Hydaelyn's whims, whether that be done by us somehow overcoming our apparent tempering, or by rewriting time and never being tempered at all. But what I was hoping for was it to mean that we would take on the darkness to balance the light and become a balance between the forces of Zodiark and Hydaelyn that would eventually bring a conclusion to this very long and very drug out storyline, because frankly, after 9 years, they've got to bring this arc to an end. It's been going on way too long. The wording and the imagery used in all the advertising led us to believe that we would indeed be a warrior of darkness through and through, not just due to some imaginary title. It would bring a shift to our abilities, maybe the loss or a change in the echo, which was reinforced by Yoshida telling us that there would be significant changes to the battle system. Secrets would be revealed to us and we would have to betray the light in some fashion. Nothing in the trailer or any of the other advertising led us to believe that we are simply going to have a shift in title due to a shift in nomenclature. The lack of any change to the dark is even stated in the game. We know who we are, and that is the Warrior of Light. That has not changed. The Crystal Exarch states that we are using the Blessing of Light to defeat the Sin Eaters, not the Blessing of Darkness. If our title of Warrior of Light is merely changing because someone else calls it something else, what would we need to embrace? What would we need to become? We are literally doing the same thing, the same way, fighting the same adversaries with the same skills, and we even have the same allies. We wouldn't have to become anything. So the whole Warrior of Darkness thing in the promotion for Shadowbringers is confusing, especially due to how hard they leaned into it. Like I said, even the title Warrior of Darkness is only used a handful of times in the main scenario. Now, whether or not this was deceptive marketing, I can't say. The people in charge of it may have just been led to believe that it was a huge arc that was going to change everything, so they leaned into it. Yoshida may have been excited about it, so he kind of lost focus on the big picture. And these trailers also take a long time, so something in the story may have changed, but it was just too late to change the trailer, so they just kind of ran with it. Or they simply could have known that it was a big hook that would catch a lot of people's attention, so they used it in the advertising, confident in the fact that the story was so good, they would really get no heat for it. That the players would eat up the story with only a few people, like myself, who would give the promotion another thought. Or, and this is the most exciting one, that we will indeed see a shift as the story moves on, that there will be a big change in our character's narrative, and we will yet get to embrace the dark, the real dark, even if only temporarily. Because right now, no, I do not believe we are the Warrior of Darkness, especially the Warrior of Darkness that they led us to believe we would become. Regardless, there's so much goodness in Shadowbringers they could have used at promoting this expansion that not seeing us truly become a Warrior of Darkness after all that hype, after all that we were told, having to just be a bit of throwaway dialogue that someone once said is kind of a letdown. Thank the 12 that this story more than made up for it. But that's all I have. What do you think? Are we the Warrior of Darkness or aren't we? Am I completely overthinking this? Because yeah, I do that quite a bit. Let's talk about it below or on social media, which is also linked below. And as per the usual, it has been a hoot. Until next time, have fun.